Hey everyone, and welcome back. Get ready, because today we are taking a deep dive into all things adolescent health.
And by deep dive, we mean deep dive. We're really going to unpack the latest research from Update in Pediatrics 2023.
Exactly. We're talking practical insights, the kind of stuff that helps you make sense of those challenging conversations about, adolescent well-being.
And helps you steer clear of those sensationalized headlines that never seem to tell the whole story.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's all about those aha moments when you hear something and think, now I get it.
And believe me when I tell you there are some real eye-openers in this research.
Oh, I bet. So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, you know me, I'm all about starting with the science, the why behind the what. And when it comes to adolescents, it all starts with the brain.
Makes sense. They're still developing, right?
Exactly. Imagine the adolescent brain like a city under construction.
Okay, I like that analogy. What's being built?
Well, you've got areas like the prefrontal cortex, which is like the city planner, responsible for things like decision-making, impulse control planning ahead. And guess what? It's still a work in progress during those teenage years.
So that explains a lot, like why teenagers sometimes seem impulsive or make decisions that make us adults scratch our heads.
Precisely. And not only that, but the communication lines between different parts of the brain are still getting wired up. It's like they're building the roads and bridges while the traffic is still trying to navigate through.
Wow, so there's a lot going on up there. No wonder those teenage years can feel like a roller coaster sometimes.
You can say that again. And speaking of roller coasters, we can't forget about the hormonal changes happening during puberty.
Oh yeah, the hormone talk. What's the science behind all of that?
So picture this. You've got this intricate feedback loop called the HPG axis. It's like a three-way conversation between the brain, the pituitary gland, and the gonads.
Okay, hold on. Break that down for me. What are the last two again?
Sure. So the pituitary gland is like the master gland. It sits at the base of the brain and sends out all sorts of hormonal signals. And the gonads, well, those are the sex organs, ovaries in females and testes in males.
Right, got it.
So this HPG axis, it's constantly sending messages back and forth. The hypothalamus in the brain sends a signal to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland then releases hormones that signal the gonads. And gonads release their own set of hormones like testosterone and estrogen, which lead to all those physical changes we associate with puberty.
Wow, it's like a perfectly choreographed dance of hormones. Way more complex than I realized.
It really is. And here's something else that might surprise you. The timing of puberty is all over the map.
What do you mean?
There's actually a huge range of what's considered normal for puberty to start and end.
Yeah.
So those terms we often hear like early bloomers or late bloomer, they can actually create a lot of unnecessary anxiety for teens and their families.
That's such a good point. We often put so much pressure on kids to develop on this arbitrary timeline. But the reality is everyone's got their own pace.
Exactly. And speaking of those physical changes puberty brings, let's talk about eating disorders.
Yeah, reading through this research was honestly eye-opening.
I agree. It really highlights the seriousness of these conditions, especially anorexia nervosa.
When I saw that anorexia has a higher mortality rate than opioid use, I was floored. What makes it so dangerous?
It's not just about restricting calories. Anorexia nervosa takes a toll on every single organ system in the body. Yeah. The heart, the kidneys, the digestive system, even the brain.
It's like a domino effect where one thing leads to another and it can spiral really quickly.
Exactly. And tragically, many people don't realize how serious it is until it's too late.
It's a stark reminder that this isn't about vanity or being thin. It's a life-threatening mental illness that deserves our attention and compassion.
100%. And while we're on the topic of eating disorders, it's important to acknowledge that this isn't just a girls' issue anymore.
That's right. We're seeing more and more boys struggling with disordered eating as well.
And a lot of it seems to stem from those societal pressures to have a certain physique, that whole bigger is better mentality.
And we can't forget about the role social media plays in all of this. It's like this whole other layer of pressure and comparison that previous generations never had to deal with.
It's true. And that brings us to another major topic we need to address, the impact of technology on adolescent health.
It really is its own beast, isn't it? Smartphones, social media, they're practically inescapable these days.
They are. And like most things, it's not all good or all bad. It's a double-edged sword.
What do you mean by that?
On one hand, technology gives teenagers this amazing ability to connect with each other, to access information, to explore their interests.
Totally. Like the creative outlets are endless. These days, kids can make music videos, learn a new language, connect with other artists from all over the world, all at their fingertips.
It's incredible when you think about it, but then there's the flip side.
The dreaded screen time debate. It's enough to make any parent's head spin.
Right. And it's not just about the amount of time, it's also about the content and how it's being used.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Social media in particular, we've all heard the concerns about cyberbullying, body image issues, fear of missing out.
And those are definitely valid concerns. But what's interesting is that the research on social media's impact on mental health isn't as clear-cut as you might think.
Really? So it's not just a simple case of social media is bad.
Not quite. It's more nuanced than that. Some studies show a correlation between social media use and increased anxiety and depression.
Which makes sense on the surface, right?
Yeah.
All that comparison. The pressure to present a perfect life online.
Exactly. But then other studies suggest that it might not be social media itself that's the problem, but rather how it's being used.
Okay, so it's like anything else. It can be a tool used for good or bad depending on the person.
Precisely. And for some teenagers, especially those who are already struggling with social anxiety or low self-esteem, social media can actually provide a sense of connection and belonging.
That's a good point. It can be an outlet for them to express themselves and find support.
Absolutely. So it's really about finding that balance, being mindful of how much time we're spending online, what we're consuming, and how it's making us feel.
And having those open and honest conversations with the teenagers in our lives about the potential risks and benefits.
100%. Now, while we're on the topic of those difficult but important conversations, the research also dives into some other challenges adolescents might face that we need to be aware of.
You're talking about things like substance use, child maltreatment, those really tough topics that no one wants to think about, but are unfortunately a reality for some families.
They are.
Yeah.
And as uncomfortable as they may be, we can't shy away from them. Knowledge is power.
I completely agree. So let's start with substance use. The sources get pretty specific about different types of drugs and even common slang terms, which I thought was interesting.
It's like they're giving us a crash course in understanding what kids these days might be exposed to.
Right. Like a heads up for parents and educators, so we can stay informed and be better equipped to support our kids.
Exactly. And it's not just about knowing the lingo. It's about understanding the very real health risks associated with different substances.
And those risks are serious. We're talking addiction, overdose, long-term health problems. It's scary stuff.
It is. And it's constantly evolving with new drugs and trends emerging all the time. Like the whole vaping epidemic a few years back, that took everyone by surprise.
Oh yeah, evil eye, e-cigarette, or vaping product use associated lung injury. Remember that? It was all over the news, people getting really sick and even dying from vaping-related lung damage.
Exactly. It just goes to show that we're still learning about the long-term effects of these substances and that education and prevention efforts are more important than ever.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about substance use. Let's move on to another really heavy but crucial topic, child maltreatment.
It's a difficult subject to talk about, but it's one that we can't ignore, especially when it comes to adolescent health.
The sources make it clear that child maltreatment can have long-lasting physical, emotional, and even societal consequences.
And unfortunately, it's more common than we'd like to think. One thing that really struck me was the emphasis on early detection.
Yes. Recognizing those warning signs, whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, or any other form of maltreatment, it's crucial to intervene early.
Absolutely. But we also have to be mindful of cultural differences in parenting styles and discipline. What might be considered abusive in one culture might be considered normal or even necessary in another.
That's a really important point. It's about finding that balance between protecting children and respecting different cultural norms, which can be tricky.
It definitely requires sensitivity and a nuanced understanding of each individual situation, but ultimately, our priority should always be the safety and well-being of the child.
Well said. Now, shifting gears a bit, I want to talk about the transition to adulthood, which is a huge milestone for any teenager, but especially for those living with chronic illnesses.
It's a critical period where they're gaining more independence and taking on more responsibility for their own health.
And for teens with chronic conditions like congenital heart defects or CHDs, that transition can be even more complex.
Definitely. They're facing unique challenges like navigating the healthcare system on their own, managing their condition independently, and dealing with the potential long-term health implications.
And let's be clear, CHDs aren't just a childhood issue. They could have serious consequences well into adulthood.
Right. Absolutely. We often associate CHDs with babies and young children, but many people live with these conditions into their adult years, and they require ongoing care and management.
Exactly. The sources mention an increased risk of heart failure, hypertension, even certain types of cancer later in life for individuals with CHDs.
Which is why that seamless transition from pediatric to adult healthcare is so crucial.
It's about making sure they have the knowledge, skills, and support they need to advocate for themselves and manage their condition effectively.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of support, early intervention is just as critical for mental health as it is for physical health.
100%.
Yeah.
Those early years are foundational for developing social-emotional skills, building resilience, and fostering positive mental well-being. It's like we often focus on the challenges they face without recognizing the strength it takes to navigate all those changes.
It's so true. They're dealing with so much at that age, physically, emotionally, trying to figure out who they are, where they fit in.
It's like their whole world is being turned upside down. And yet they adapt, they grow, they find their way.
Which brings us to that really thought-provoking question the sources leave us with. How can we better equip adolescents to be advocates for their own health and well-being? How can we give them more of a voice?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've spent all this time talking about what adults can do, but what about empowering teens to take charge of their own health?
Exactly. It's about giving them the knowledge, the skills, the confidence to make informed decisions about their bodies and their minds.
So where do we even begin with that?
Well, it starts with information. Accurate, age-appropriate information about their physical health, their mental health, the risks they might face, and the resources available to them.
And not just in a boring textbook kind of way, right? It has to be engaging and relevant to their lives.
100%. We need to meet them where they're at. Use technology to our advantage. Find creative ways to get the message across.
And it can't just be a one-time thing either. These conversations need to be ongoing, open, honest.
Absolutely. Parents talking to their kids, teachers incorporating health and well-being into the curriculum in a way that resonates with young people.
Healthcare providers treating adolescents as partners in their own care, explaining things in a way they understand, asking for their input.
It's about creating a culture where young people feel seen, heard, respected, and empowered to take ownership of their health.
Because at the end of the day, that's what we all want for them, right? To grow into healthy, confident, resilient adults.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about fostering their potential, not just focusing on the problems.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of adolescent health, let's remember that it's a journey.
A journey with its ups and downs, its challenges and triumphs.
And it's our job to support young people every step of the way, to be their guides, their cheerleaders, their advocates.
So listen to them, learn from them, and believe in their ability to create a healthier and brighter future for themselves and for generations to come.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What can you do today to empower the young people in your life to take charge of their well-being? Until next time, keep those conversations going.